20 years ago when I began to be a professor at University of Alberta, I was asked to participate in a session called Academic Keywords in my own department, which could have been subtitled, Why I'm Kind of an Odd English Professor. So we'll do that again now. I work on life writing, that's what the field's called, and so that means that almost all the work I do is about life and what actually does that mean and whether lives are narrative or not, and how time works in narrative and non-narrative forms. There are times when I actually do talk to real human beings about these things, in some ways the way sociologists do, but there's other times when I study text and representation, and I'm interested in those things as well. I am interested in the idea of subjective time and how beyond using just phenomenology, we can get at understanding how time constructs a subject, a person, and hence shoots through subjects with the force of the social, which I think is something that a lot of you study also. In published memoirs, life writing scholars talk about time retrospectively. The self who writes is not always the written I, it's something else, right? It's a persona of some kind, and the gap between the self who writes and the one that is written is often expressed temporally when writers explore how they construct the idea of youth or growth and development, and they comment on that, right? That's a typical thing. Also, many of us working in the area understand trauma and the way trauma can be represented as about time's collapse. So not only psychologically do people who've experienced trauma have difficulty understanding that what's in the past is not happening right now all over again, but also how are you going to represent that or write that? And the area of psychoanalysis was about trying to smooth out those ideas of time. It has become apparent in the intervening years that people writing about trauma or writing through trauma often use writing as a way to try to mix up those senses of time. So those are some of the things that happen in my field. I'm interested in some of the unusual ways that time occurs, not only as a topic, but also as a way of constructing something inside of unusual objects. So one of them is the cartoon Fun Home, or the comic, and some of you may know about it. It is sometimes called a graphic novel. That's a bit of a misnomer, since Alison Bechdel, who is the person who constructed it, is actually recounting aspects of her own life story. I just want to say a couple things about it because I think that Bechdel is really interested in some of these thorny questions about time and how to represent yourself in time. And they're connected to something that I sent to my two other speakers, an essay I wrote recently about diaries and time. And the way the diary works inside of other narratives can tell you also things about time. And diaries are an interesting way to talk about time and representation because all of you, or maybe most of you, have kept them, but they are a secret genre. You will never share them, or if you do, it's not always a good thing. And they're about a construction of the self from the 18th century onward that means that you can have a self that has a secret, and they're not meant for other people. And so what does time mean in that circumstance when it's not retrospective, it's not for an audience? And so I want to say a few things about that in light of Alison Bechdel. So in Fun Home, the story of Fun Home is about Bechdel's father, who is a closeted gay man. She expresses his state of being as an invert. It's also about her own coming out as a lesbian and her father's possible suicide because he is about to be exposed publicly. That's a theory she has. Her mother doesn't agree with this theory. Bechdel's father is someone who tries to keep his spatial environment neat and separate as a way to cope with this. So his other world, the world of gays and cruising, but is supposed to be separate from his home life, but it leaks into his home life as he obsessively renovates his home and makes it more campy and Baroque constantly. It is time that ends up undoing that separateness. Bechdel finds an old photo of her dad, happy with other young men, obviously gay, free in that moment, and she doesn't know what she's seeing. So she decides as an adult to try to work through that undoing of space and time by recreating important scenes from her life to do with her dad. She literally shoots photos of herself playing her dad, and then she projected them onto a screen, and then she drew the scenes into a comic. And she invented techniques to help her do this. She has said herself she is obsessed by the idea of capturing the past in all its pastness and commenting on it. So to move ahead to this, one of the things she did was she also rewrote passages from her own diary from when she was a child because she wanted to show how keeping a diary, and she ultimately failed to do so, she became obsessed with trying to capture every moment in her diary. Ultimately, she was unable to do that. And so one of the reasons why that's important is that inside the retrospective time of the autobiography, you see diary time. So I just want to end with that. Philippe Lejeune, who is a French sociologist and somebody who I think is the foremost theorist on the idea of diary time, has asked us, who, when you're writing a diary, are you writing to? Are you writing to anyone? In diaries from the 18th century, people stopped writing letters and started using the letter form to write to something, dear diary. Are you writing to the material? Are you writing to someone else? And what Lejeune says is, you're writing to yourself in the future. He actually says that we are, the past person writing and the person reading as an adult, are helping each other across time. And he actually asks people who do that to be kind and gentle with their former selves. When you're reading your teenage diaries and your crushes and obsessions, he actually asks you to be not critical of that person, but to help that person who could not understand the events as they unfold in a diary continuously in the present, the way that you can later. And so that as an address to the future, and then you're in the future, and you can read back and think through it for the past. So to finally end, diaries don't end, they stop. There is no ending. You don't go, they lived happily ever after. You just stop keeping it. So they are traces of a life, but they aren't life. Life moves on through and around, but they do capture something of a process. They're part of an alternative idea of time, perhaps even queer time, the way Judith Halberstam talks about it, and how the subject makes and remakes itself for the future.